Right. Good evening, everybody. We've just gone 6 o'clock, so let's try and make a start. First of all, before we begin anything else, can I just ask Eunice, if she will, to go through the apologies that we've received for this evening, please? Well, it was my turn, Eunice. You usually get me.
Chair, apologies received from councillors Ambia, Mahmood and Isles. And we have Councillor Rumi Chaudhry as sub for Councillor Isles, and Councillor Mahmood Hussain is standing as sub for Councillor Basit Mahmood. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Next is the minutes. We have two sets of minutes to go through. We have the minutes from the 18th of September. There is, first of all, the public version. Does anybody have anything they wish to raise in connection with those minutes, or are you happy that I should sign those off? Okay, in which case we will take those minutes as being correct. We apparently have got to pass a resolution at item 13, you're saying, which is that one then, please, Eunice?
Yes, Chair, that is to sign off the private version of the minutes from that 18th of September meeting.
Okay, so we have the private minutes, which was at item 13 of the agenda. That's the private meeting part from the 18th of September. Does anybody have any issues to raise in connection with those, please?
13, you will pass the resolution to go private, and then we can take that item.
Okay, that's fine.
Can I just ask you, are you taking the things that came up in the appendix after? You said you asked for any questions we had on the minutes, but some of the questions and answers came separately as an appendix. So are you taking those separately, or have we moved on?
No, we will come to those as part of the normal agenda, because you will have found those in the main meeting papers.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Pass the resolution. Just a few items first by way of Chair's update, please. The Town Centre consultation report. You'll have seen that we have the Town Centre consultation report, and it has been listed on the 20th of November meeting of this board. I need to explain the fact that the report is ready. We also, though, have the reference that was made from this board last time to executive concerning resources associated with highways. And that reference to executive is due to happen. So I have to appear then for executive to present that representation. And we will have the results of that as well available for when that is relisted. Okay. There is also an outstanding request for a pilot scheme associated with the underground refuse systems. Now, the service manager for strategy and sustainability, Sean Askins, has said that he is prepared to come forward to put that item onto our programme for the 26th of February. But, and I'll ask Sue to join in a second, but that is subject to whether or not there is sufficient resource available to produce that report, because there is quite a lot of work associated with doing it. So may I ask, Sue, if you can, for you to clarify a little for the board?
Does this one? Oh yeah, it does work. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just spoke to Sean this afternoon actually about this item. We would need to get some support to produce the report. You're probably aware we are going through a big procurement process with the new waste contract at the moment. So we are, we've got a heavy workload, but putting that to one side, we also don't have the necessary information that we would need to produce the report. So probably be a consultant that would undertake the work for us. We don't have a budget to undertake that work at the moment. So I think that would have to be agreed with the portfolio holder or potentially executive, depending on the cost.
So how are you proposing that we go forward on this then, Sue? Because if we missed that provisionally for the 26th of February meeting, how could we get an update on what's possible and what isn't and when?
We can probably bring something to give you a bit more information around resource requirement and what we can provide in terms of level of detail for that February meeting. But I'm happy to speak to the portfolio holder and take further advice around that as to see how we want to go forward with this.
Sean has previously told us that he wanted to bring this report in the context of the significant changes the government is planning to introduce in the regulations on waste disposal. And as we know, the government continually puts off announcing exactly what it wants to do. If that is his context, then frankly, I don't see what we can do except hope the government makes their mind up when they're going to actually tell local authorities what they're planning to do. There's this plan they keep talking about to make all the recycling regulations, for example, the same up and down the country, so that all local authorities are doing the same recycling work. But as with the current government, they never actually come out with a definite proposal, and they just keep putting it off and putting it off. So if he's right that he wants to bring it in that context, then that's one of the reasons we haven't got it yet.
Thank you. That's a really pertinent point, actually, because on Saturday lunchtime, we received a letter from DEFRA telling us very broadly what the government were intending to introduce. This is the first time we've had any information recently about it. And there is a meeting with DEFRA tomorrow taking place. Sean's going to. It was very short notice, I have to say. But we might be able to, so off the back of that, and I haven't looked at the letter in any detail yet, they're proposing to hold some consultations. We could probably certainly bring that back and give you an update on where we are with that, with what the government are proposing to do. That probably be helpful. And then within that context, any other information that we can provide.
I think that would be helpful, Chair. Thank you.
Yes, we would very much appreciate an update, and it'd obviously be better after that meeting that he's going to. Thank you. We also had previous item, which was Step Forward, the new place brand for Luton. We have an agreement now from Sinead McNamara to give us a progress update to our OSB meeting on the 17th of January. And Sinead will actually do that update herself. So that's where we currently stand on that. Yes, Councillor Steve.
It's slightly worrying that it's being pushed right back. One of the things that I'm concerned about is that we did make the point earlier on, and I know that Sinead came and gave us a verbal update. But one of the things I'm concerned about is that we had asked for the names of the ambassadors that are being used. And since that time, there's a leaflet that's gone out that had ambassadors' names on it before it actually came to us on the scrutiny board. So I think that's quite unsatisfactory. So can we please ask that in the meantime, prior to that January meeting, that perhaps to the next board meeting that we have an update on the names of the ambassadors that have been chosen in the meantime.
Yes, she has also emailed separately saying that she has a meeting with some potential new ambassadors and that we will get feedback on that.
Prior to January, I hope,
yes.
Chair.
Yes, indeed.
Thank you.
Final update from me. We also had a war on waste. There was a recommendation from OSB on the 18th of February. And just to let you know that the recommendation was included in the executive report on the 9th of October, just to try and make sure that you're tidy and up to date with what's happened to the recommendation. Okay, I think I'm back onto the agenda again, Eunice.
You are, Chair.
So, back onto the proper agenda. Are there any disclosures of interest, please?
No, Chair, not at this point.
Okay. Any urgent business?
No urgent business, Chair.
Okay. Any references from committees and other bodies?
No references, Chair.
Okay. So we're now on to item 7, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Who is presenting anything to do with this report, please?
Chair, this report is not being presented.
Okay.
We have attached the report from the last meeting on the 18th of September, just as a reference point for members and for the officer who is here to respond to some of those questions from members today. And we have Colin.
Who is here to respond?
We have Colin Moon, and there's somebody who is meant to be online. Yeah, Paul is online as well from Children's Services, Chair.
Okay, so. Thank you. Those of you who've gone all the way through the papers, we had the complete report that we considered at our last meeting reproduced in these papers. We had asked for members to present questions from the last meeting. There were in practice only a very small number of questions which were asked. You'll find those in the report on pages 82 and 83 of your meeting papers from tonight. So if we can perhaps just go through those questions. But I would also like to add the fact that I'm considering whether or not in future reports of this type should be pre-issued to members so that we can put forward questions in advance to give the officers a better chance to respond to us, because otherwise I think we are in danger with a totally generic, wide-ranging report like this to actually require too much officer attendance at the meeting to be able to give us individual responses. So I feel, and I put this to the board before we begin any further, do you think that it's a good idea for us to get a report like this in advance and for members to put in written questions to give officers a better chance to respond? What's the feeling about that, please?
The fact is that in order to get officers here to answer questions on all of the relevant subjects in the report, you would probably need 20 or 30 officers present. And that's, to my mind, a completely unreasonable request. If the report could be given to us a little earlier, and giving it a little earlier may sometimes mean it has to actually turn up at one meeting later than was planned, then I don't have a problem with that. But provided it comes in time for members to look at it, and provided it comes with a very clear statement that emailed questions must be submitted in advance, presumably to Eunice, so that she can field them off to the relevant officers, then I think that's probably the only way we're actually going to get sensible answers to perfectly reasonable questions. We really can't expect 20 or 30 officers to attend. That's an absolute ridiculous waste of officers' time.
Comments or questions? Yes.
Yeah, Chair, I'd just like to reiterate what Councillor Franks has said, because certainly I'd had questions that I thought about after the last meeting when we didn't get any opportunities really to be able to ask proper questions. So I would really like the opportunity to do email questions. Thank you.
Further questions or comments?
I mean, that is fine, so long as perhaps picking up the point there that there are issues that may arise after those submitted. So we must have an opportunity still to be able to ask questions, even though the main ones have been submitted.
Okay, well, in the process of doing what I'm proposing, which is I will discuss with the officers to make sure that we're all in agreement with the process. I would be happy if there are any additional questions on this report that they're still, even at this point, sent in through Eunice, and I will coordinate those together with Eunice so that when we discuss with the officers a slightly revised procedure, we will also pose any additional questions. So you'll have a further opportunity, should you wish to do so, to ask questions.
Chair, sorry, can I just come in, please? I mean, the agenda is usually published about at least 5 working days before the date of the meeting. And so if members are asking for additional time, is it in addition to the 5 working days of publication, or, you know, what do you actually mean?
Yes, it is, because we feel that this sort of wide-ranging report would require members to have that in advance. And like Councillor Franks has just suggested, if that means that in order to get satisfactory answers, we have to move the report on to the next OSP in order to allow that time, then so be it.
I think, Chair, we might need to have a separate conversation about this. The reason is some of these reports, when they come to OSB, they are tied in, they are linked to executive reporting time. So if we're going to be asking officers to resubmit the report, that might not work well with the timeline we have with either reporting to the executive or reporting to other committees. So I think it's something that members really want to think carefully about.
That's fine. So can I ask you, Eunice, if you will, to convene a meeting certainly for at least myself and maybe also Councillor Franks to sit down with yourself and with officers for us to be able to consider that. Okay, can I, sorry, yes.
I think in terms of fairness, before you change in any procedure or any. Yeah, I've got the mic on now. I said, before you consider changing any of the rules or proposal, then you ought to have members from this group as well on that, rather than just yourself or Councillor Franks.
Yes, happy to have somebody from the Labour group join us as well. Do I have a nominee?
Chair, can I just come in and say it may be useful to have the leader of the Labour group. Obviously, if Councillor Franks is going to be there, this, from what I'm picking up from Eunice, affects the executive and their timetable as well. So I think the leader of the Labour group should be there as well as somebody from this group.
I think first instance, I need to take this back to Democratic Services and speak to officers to see how we can work around the time, and then probably set up a meeting with members, if that's okay. So I do require that advice and support, Chair.
I'm quite happy with that, Eunice, but we do take the comment on board that as it could well affect executive as well, that if it comes down to a meeting, then yes, we will invite the leader of the council to join in as well. Thank you. Good suggestion. Okay, finally, sorry to have been on a little diversion there, but it was important. Can I point you towards the pages 82 and 83 of the papers for this meeting, please? Right. How would members of this board like us to do these? Do you want me to take the items one by one? Yes, take them one by one. Okay, so if we go through page 9, the question that was asked was that if 16% of homelessness claims were accepted, what happened to the 84% that were rejected, and how many families does this represent? Are we able to get an officer response, please? I see Colin has stepped forward, so that's very good. Thank you, Colin.
Thank you, Chair. So essentially the answer is that the rest are essentially given advice and assistance, because the rest probably have been rejected because they have no priority need, or they're not threatened with homelessness, they're not eligible, all sorts of reasons why we won't accept that application, and they're various. So the assumption is that 84% fall out the system, and they've got to find somewhere to live. Well, some of them just aren't eligible for housing because of potential immigration control, for example, limited immigration control, no recourse to public funds. We don't deal with those households, or because they've just got no priority need. There may be single people with no vulnerabilities, and the legislation suggests they can go and find their own accommodation without assistance, apart from advice and assistance from the council. So that's the answer to that question, Councillor.
Any questions for the officer?
Just going back to one of the questions that we asked in the previous meeting, will you be looking at how you're assessing individuals in terms of the homelessness? I'm just going by my own experience of that client, that resident that I had, who was quite vulnerable, but yet wasn't actually categorized as being vulnerable when she went through the assessment. So will you be looking to perhaps have a look at that and change that or tweak it perhaps?
Councillor, no. Every step of the way in homeless legislation, there is a review process, and the customer can ask for a review. So if we say you're not in priority need, they can review that, and it's a formal review by an officer who hasn't made that decision. So in legislation, every step of the way, there is a review mechanism where absolutely confident that within the process there's sufficient reviews that people won't go get through net if there's inappropriate decisions made. And obviously people who are who feel that they haven't had the right decision can go to their local councillor, can go to their MP, can write to us, can ask for review, can go to court, etc., etc., etc. There's enough review mechanisms in place to ensure that if people feel that the wrong decision has been made, they can have that reviewed. And we believe our decision making is quite robust around the homeless legislation.
So in terms of that, are you making like the residents aware when they first put in their claim for the homelessness and the assessment, are they made aware that they have a right to go through an independent person and have that review done? Because that's not been the experience that people have said to me.
Thank you, Councillor. Every decision is in writing to the customer, and it is clear about their route for review. I suppose, Councillor, if I say that if we closed our doors to every single application from today, it would probably take 15 years to rehouse everyone. We've got 1,021 homeless households in all forms of temporary accommodation as at today. That's quite a lot. What we do every year, sorry, just excuse my voice for a second. What we do every year, we assume how many homeless households are going to come through the door. We assume how many we're going to prevent. We assume how many we're going to house permanently. We also assume how many we're going to house in the private sector. Now, I'm sorry, I can't work on data that's a quarter old, so I'm working up to date. So I'm working on the September figures, and we project for this year 210 homeless households will get housed in council or housing association property, and at the end of September, that's 6 months, we've housed 110. We project that we will house 170 homeless households. These are separate households in the private rented sector. And at the end of September, we've housed 94. And some of those are going to be out of borough. I'm not going to duplicate the figures here, but of those 94, 77 have been out of borough household, and majority of those have probably gone into that Bedford portfolio that we some of us will know about. So if you add up the figures, that's about 200 homeless households so far who've been housed at month 6, and we're looking to house nearly 400 homeless households. So those figures are old that you quoted. I know they are because they're they're quarter 1 figures. I've just brought you up to date, so we don't, the issue around housing homeless households is more about keeping pace with the demand coming through the door. The demand coming through the door is quite large, so that's what we try to do, councillors, to keep pace. But if we were to close the door, I mean, for example, if we didn't house any households from the housing register or council tenants on the transfer list, we would house roughly around 500 homeless households a year, because essentially that's how many council housing association properties we get, and about 170 in the private sector. And with 1,000 plus, that's 5 years plus worth of housings. But a lot of those households need 3 and 4 bedroom accommodation, and that's a 5 or 6 or 7 year wait. It just depends on the size of those homeless households and their needs. Difficult question to ask. It's how long is a piece of string in some cases, but the demand keeps coming through the door, 460 on average every month. Not all of them will accept, but about 20% of those are accepted every single month, and adds to that tally, if you like.
Further questions or queries? Yes.
Colin, I was going to ask you, how many of those 1,000 on the temporary accommodation are actually asylum seekers, and how much of that demand coming through is asylum seekers?
So thanks, Councillor. So none of them are asylum seekers, because if you get your stay as an asylum seeker, you essentially are no longer an asylum seeker. You are a homeless household, benefiting from all the rights under the legislation. So if you want me to, so if you want me to be a little bit more specific, because I know what question you're asking, but I have to be technical about it. I have to be technical about it. You know, and we don't count it in that way, because as I said before, the legislation says if you get a decision, a positive decision, you're not an asylum seeker. You're a homeless household with all the rights of the legislation. If you want me to guess, because I don't have the figures in front of me, maybe 5%. If you want me to get some figures for you, I can happily get some figures for you. Ex-asylum seekers, Councillor. I'll get some information for you.
Any more questions, or should we move on? Move on. Okay. It was referring then to ASB cases. How do you arrive at 19.4 cases, and what is 0.4 of a case?
So the answer here, Councillor, is it's not so technical. Well, I'll read it anyway. The KPI is antisocial behaviour cases relative to the size of the landlord. So we've got to divide it by the number of properties we've got. So we get the total amount of as cases and divide them by the size of the housing stock. This is hugely unlikely to result in a single number, and will nearly always result in a fraction of a number as well. So it's a number divided by another number, depending on the housing stock, and you know, that's how the calculator comes out.
Sorry, Colin, don't blame me. It was the question that was asked. Right. Next one. Right. Not only the number of preventable home, not only is the number of preventable homes not on track to meet 342 target, why is the target so far below the 2021 figure, which was 517? So the homeless has gone from 342 to 517.
So, Councillor, what we did was we combined the prevention target and the relief target then. And prevention, this means when you come through the door, in the first 56 days, we owe homeless households a prevention duty. So within that 56 days, we try to prevent them from being homeless. And after that 56 days, they move into the relief phase. Usually they're in temporary accommodation. That's another 56 days where we can relieve homelessness. Essentially, it's another prevention. We just put them together, and that's why the figure was so large. But as at the end of September, we have prevented 127 households against a target of 342. So we are slightly down on our actual prevention figure, but the relief figure is 197 end of September, and our year target is 241. So we're doing quite reasonably well on the relief. So we bung them together at the end. They're essentially all prevention figures, but that's what we did. Then we put them together. That's why that figure looks a bit lower than it is.
Chair, it would be useful going forward if we had consistency, because we were trying to compare based on figures that we were given, and we weren't told until you kindly told us now that the relief figures were in those. So either we need to keep consistently having the preventables and relief combined, or we should go back and maybe change that figure for that 2020 and 2021, because we're not comparing like with like, and it gives a wrong figure, if you like, for comparison purposes.
So so at the moment, right now, we are keeping them separate because that's the way the HCLIC figure is a government request for information, and that's the way the system is set up. So I'm not 100% sure why it was done in 2021 like that. It was just combined. We just combined the figures because sometimes it's really difficult to explain what prevention and what relief is. People don't understand it. Essentially, it's all prevention of homelessness. It's just that when the new legislation came in, government decided that they should badge it differently because it was better for monitoring purposes. So I'm not, Councillor, I'm not going to go back to 2021 and change all of our figures. That would just be a nightmare. We present the figures in a particular way. You can combine them, you can pull them apart, but we keep them separate because it's better for monitoring purposes, and that's what government requires us to do on the system.
Just a question then arising out of that kind. I understand what you're saying. Going forward, will we be in a position where we can compare like with like?
Absolutely, Councillor.
The next one was complaints relative to size of landlord. And what are we trying to do to try and bring about some improvement? I gather this is what we said before, which is that the target was 7.4 and we got complaints at 8.7.
Councillor, at the moment, I'm not happy with our complaints performance. At the end of September, our complaints for councillors and MPs was at 76%. So we're answering 76% on time. That's just not good enough. Freedom of information, 77%. That's just not good enough. And complaints, 78%. Now, I'm sure if I compare them with other council services, they may not be that bad. But, you know, that's 25% of complaints that are not being answered on time. We get quite a lot of complaints in housing for all sorts of reasons, and we're trying to sort that out. So it just needs a bit more monitoring. I'm not going to say it needs more capacity, more officers' time, but we're struggling to find the time to get them done on time. So we're working on that at the moment, Councillor. But that's down to us. That's down to me to make sure that we get those responses out in better time than we have been.
Any questions on that? Okay. Town centre vibrancy, where the question was asked about unreliability of figures, and a request was being made to say, could sensors and cameras be relocated? Officers wanted to have more context and a bit more detail before they're able to respond. So anybody want to make any comment about that?
Slightly different comment.
We've been repeatedly told when we've asked questions about these figures in the past that the sensors actually pick up every time someone walks past one of the sensors. That's what they're there for. So people wandering about around the town centre might go past one of the sensors several times. We've just been told over and over again that the figures are not to be relied upon for that reason. What, for goodness sake, can be done about it, given that the footfall at the town centre is falling, we know it is, and we want to do something about it. And if you want to do something about it, you need to find a way to get more accurate information.
Council, I'm not being lined up here as a sacrificial lamb to answer responses to other services, so I have to bow to my colleagues who aren't here, I'm afraid.
Were you volunteering?
If you want to ask someone to give me a written answer to that at some time, I'm quite happy for that.
you at the moment have got Sue seems to have volunteered to add
Well-
to the debate, David.
Thank you, Chair. No apologies. I wasn't volunteering. I was just going to say I've noted what Councillor Franks has said, and I will go back and give that explanation to colleagues in inclusive economy so they can do a written response for you.
Thank you.
Chair,
Councillors.
I remember asking, this is partly my fault too, and my apologies to Eunice. It's when I actually asked additional question, which was regarding the footfall at the last OSB. I think maybe I overlooked to put it in the written submission that I gave to Eunice, but I asked at that time, what were the apparent reasons for the poor footfall in the town? And I asked whether it was to do with safety or whether it was to do with the fact that we've lost most of our high level shops, such as Debenhams, Marks and Spencer. Do you remember that, Eunice? I did ask at the time, sorry. And I would like to see if there's some research is being carried out as to what, because we won't know how we can try and do something about it unless we get that evidence.
Comment, Eunice?
Chair, I don't really have any comment on that one.
Okay, we'll put that through as a written question and see whether we can get any form of answer for you. Can we put that through as a written question, please, Eunice?
Chair, that's all right. I'll try and send that to relevant department.
Thank
I think it will be inclusive economy as well, as you just said.
Okay, next one.
Further to what Councillor Stevens said, it would be good in a written response if we could have some benchmarking about footfalls in other towns, because there is a trend, a national trend towards online shopping. And it would be good to see, as well as the research he's asking for, what the national trend is and whether we can benchmark ourselves, because everybody is shopping online, particularly the younger generation, and the footfalls could be falling across the whole of the country and may not be something specific to Luton.
It's hard to compare against Milton Keynes then.
Milton Keynes is a city, and I think we need to be comparing ourselves to a town.
I must say that it isn't just the younger generation that does things online either, I can assure you. The next item was concerning pupil exclusions, and there was the response that we had, as you'll see on page 83, says that the figures were concerning the academic year to date. Any further questions or comments in response to that reply, please?
Only to say, when you're referring to a year that's already ended, it might be a good idea to make sure that that's clear in the dialogue. I mean, the report was dated well after the year had ended, but before the new year had started. So I just think the description of figures that were being given were not terribly helpful.
Chair, we do have Paul online to respond to some of these questions from Children's Services.
Paul, you're online. Are you wanting to input
Yeah.
at this stage?
I'm online, yes. No, I think that's a fair comment. That's actually the clarity about what the data referring to needs to be clear, because we can work to different years, academic years, financial years and everything else. So I do think that we'll make sure that that's clear in future.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Franks?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. The next one was the reason for changing the description on unaccompanied children to separated. The response that we received was that this was a change not instigated by Newton, but was done from a central government point of view. Is that a satisfactory answer? So then the final item is the one which said the percentage of children attending good and outstanding primary schools, which is 91.8%, and special schools at 100%. The question that was being asked was, why is the number attending good and outstanding secondary schools lagging so far behind? And what, if anything, can the council do about it? We had a reply that was effectively saying about re-inspections. Would you like to expand?
Yes, just to say that the proportion of children attending, we've got fewer secondary schools, so therefore the percentage of children attending those schools is higher than it would be for primary schools. So therefore we don't need many secondary schools to be less than good for the percentage of children not attending good or outstanding schools to be higher. And you will see from the written answer there, we have 2 secondary schools that are not yet good or outstanding. The timing for turning that round for them to be re-inspected is outside of the local authority's control. It sits with Ofsted, and they will come back when they feel the time is right as part of the schedule to re-inspect those 2 schools. For Lee Manor, that's recently academised into Chiltern Learning Trust, and as part of the statutory requirements, once school academises, it has to have been inspected to allow the trust to settle the school and to move it forward. So it's unlikely that Lee Manor will be inspected and removed from its current category until that time. And we're obviously working with both trusts, Chiltern Learning Trust and Shared Learning, who run the other school, to try and help them improve the school at this moment in time. But those figures for secondary are unlikely to change until the next inspection, which is outside the local authority's hands.
So is it just because of those 2 schools? Are we saying that it's the 2 schools that have been mentioned were responsible for bringing those figures down to that level? Is that what is being said?
We only have 2 secondary schools in Luton that are less than good, and they are the 2 schools that are labelled in the report and the answer to the question. And therefore, the proportion of children attending those schools compared with the proportion of children in secondary altogether inevitably will then skew it so that there are fewer children attending good or outstanding schools in secondary, because we have those 2 schools that are yet to meet that benchmark.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you, Paul, for coming online to give us some answers. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving forward then, I think we're now on to item 8.
That's correct.
Item 8 is the authority monitoring report. Now, those of you who've studied all of this report, there is a lot of information in there. I think I ought to wish Sue luck in terms of putting this one across the board. Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to introduce the report because my colleague Sarah has actually been writing this report for some time now and is far more familiar with it than I am and what is behind the figures. So hopefully she will be able to answer any questions you may have. We've taken the report as read. You'll note that the recommendation is to note the contents of the report. So it's a factual report, technical report, which is a statutory requirement. I'll just point out that we haven't produced one of these recently, mainly because we were unable to recruit staff to planning posts. And so we were very low in terms of resources, and it's taken until now, and it's a big job to actually pull all the facts and figures together, because it does require us to go through lots of data and look at what's being completed. So this is all based around completions, what's changed in the last 4 years. So the AMR, sorry, I'd say the it used to be called the annual monitoring report. It's called the authority monitoring report now. And it is something that is helpful in terms of looking at what our policies should be going forward. And some members here will be aware that we are going to be reviewing the local plan, taking that forward. So the data that is included within this document will be very helpful going forward in terms of understanding how the policies are operating. And with that, I will hand over to Sarah just to pick out the key highlights in the report. But of course, if you've got further questions, happy to try and help. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just ask a question first? Sarah, welcome. I don't think that you and I have met. What your surname as well, please?
My name is Sarah Farr. F-A-R-R.
Thank you very much. Sorry to have asked the question.
That's all
I
right.
wanted to be sure I knew.
So the main findings of the authority monitoring report in terms of employment, the policies have been working quite well in that we've lost smaller sites, these have mainly been from the town centre, and these have moved towards allocated sites such as Butterfield and Dallow. And we've lost much smaller sites, and they've been able to move to larger, more specific employment-related areas. The loss of employment sites in the town centre, but also elsewhere dotted around further out, have mostly been through permitted development, i.e. office to residential conversions. Although there have been conversions to other classes as well. During this period, the period of report, so 2018-19 through to 21-22, 513 dwellings were delivered through permitted development, of which 97 were studio flats, 265 one-bedroom flats, and 72 bed or larger flats. So you can see that that's skewed quite highly towards the much smaller developments. While this figure is quite high, it should be noted that office to residential conversion rates have dropped in this period compared to the previous few years. And this is because we brought in an Article 4 direction to stop that happening. Housing delivery overall has not followed our identified need. Over 70% of dwellings provided have been flats, 41.9% of which were one-bed flats or studio flats, whereas our identified need was for 99% of dwellings to be houses. The main reason for the over-delivery of smaller units is viability. Developers have argued that they need to bring more smaller units forward, to enable them to also deliver the larger units that we actually require. I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
I was actually going to make a statement, but it is part of a question as well, if you like. I mean, it strikes me that that we may need to, at the end of the session, need to look at the recommendation that we are being asked to make, because I'm not quite sure it's going to be appropriate. Because the areas of major concern I see that are coming across in this report, maybe that could be clarified, is that we are mismatching the needs of the town currently. We're obviously producing large numbers of one-bedroom flats or studio flats, which are primarily aimed at the student market, oversupply to the student market, where, I mean, there is already in fact, there's oversupply and there's not enough students to take those. The worrying side of it is obviously we're not producing the 2, 3, 4-bedroom houses in the town. But what is of even more concern is that in an aging population, we're not building properties for older people. So I think those 3 issues should be major concerns for us to look at and to maybe send something back to the executive, because we should no longer be giving planning permission to 1-bedroom flats. We're not even filling those that we've got. But we should be trying to put an emphasis, whether it's through flats or houses. We're not really building houses at the moment in the town. But we should be looking to send a message clearly back to the executive that we need to look at what we're doing in planning and what we're trying to do going into the future. It is also a concern, although I noticed our colleague didn't put it as a concern, that we are losing the employment facilities within the town. There are people that do, many people do work in the town, and it is an opportunity also. Or should I say, it should, we should be trying to preserve what we got, and we should be trying to stop. And I know that now we have an opportunity in planning to stop office blocks being turned into unsuitable flats. And we've had a number of those in the town centre. So really there are 4 key areas, aren't there? No more 1-bedroom, or cutting back the number of 1-bedroom flats or studio flats, emphasising that we need to have more family homes, emphasising that we need to have more homes for elderly people, and finally, perhaps trying to put a halt. And I know that Robin Porter himself would like to see us turning apartment, office blocks into totally unsuitable accommodation for families. So I think perhaps it's something, maybe David, sometimes you're better at putting wording on this. Maybe we should put a recommendation at the end of this that we address those issues.
The officers want to just respond to what Councillor Stevens has just said.
Thank you, Councillor Stevens. Planning system, unfortunately, has got lots of restrictions within it, which mean that actually, without going into lots and lots of detail, which if you're on Development Management Committee, you'd probably get a really good understanding of, but obviously it's a complex system, the planning system. Lots of regulation, lots of rules around it. Fundamentally, the issue we have in Luton is not enough land. So all of our land pretty much has been developed. When we do get planning applications, as my colleague has said, they tend to be for the smaller units. I think if we were to look into it, we could provide you with some statistics whereby in recent years, certainly in the past couple of years, we have increased the number of slightly larger units as a proportion of the total. We are getting less and less studio and 1-bed flats. It's still not enough, as you quite rightly point out. We're not getting the bigger properties, but that's due to a scarcity of land. It's also due to something called viability, which unfortunately developers can use against us. So if a development is deemed to be unviable, they can present us with a report. We get that independently checked. Now, if that is the case, we are not in a strong position to turn away that planning application. We have lost appeals because of that, where we have turned down applications. And so we're very conscious, because when we do go to appeal, the developer can be awarded costs. So our decisions are carefully balanced in terms of the officer recommendation. And I think members of Planning Development Management Committee are very familiar with all these issues that we are suffering in Luton. I don't know if Councillor Franks wanted to add anything to that, because he does sit on planning committee. But what I would say though is that there are planning reforms being proposed, which may give us more ability to actually require the right types of dwellings in the right places of the right size. But we've yet to see those come through. The government are literally just closed the consultation on that. So we have responded strongly on that as well. So Sarah's just reminded me as well that once we've got the AMR published, we've got more evidence that is in the public domain to basically back up some decisions. So it may be that this document actually strengthens our position from a planning perspective. We'll have to test that and potentially test it at appeal. But appeals are very costly to the council. And so any decision making around planning applications that could potentially go to appeal and then we don't have strong reasons for refusal, we have to be very careful about, as I say, because of the cost of that to the council. And the planning system is intended to allow, it gives a principle of development in the hands of developers more than the council actually, provided it meets certain requirements and is deemed to be sustainable in other respects. It's quite a complicated subject, but I'm not disagreeing with what you're saying. It's a case of how you want us to respond to that. I mean, I think the best way to respond to it is through the local plan review process that we're going to be going through in the next year or so. So I think, we will take that on board. We will be looking at all these policies for the future, and we will try and ensure that they're stronger and that they meet, more the needs of Luton going forward.
You referenced Councillor Franks and he'd held his hand up, so I'll let him come in at this point. But I do have to say that the report is not just about housing, and I'd like to come on to some of those other issues in due course.
Now, I've got a number of points I'd like to make on the report when convenient, but at the moment, while we're talking about one-bedroom flats as opposed to what the town actually does need, we are told on Development Management Committee all the time that it's all about viability, which leads us, of course, to believe that developers make more money on one-bedroom flats than they do on 2- and 3-bedroom flats. I'm quite sure this is all about building costs per square metre and resale values. I just think a short report explaining to us how that arithmetic actually works might be helpful, because all we have at the moment is the story that you need lots of one-bedroom flats because that's where the money is, and it in effect enables the developers to build also 2- and 3-bedroom flats. There's got to be a formula in there somewhere that will help us to understand exactly how that piece of arithmetic works. So a short report explaining that would be helpful, I think.
Sue, I'd just like to ask, does the figures include HMOs? Because we do get a lot of requests for HMOs in planning.
The figures do include C4 HMOs, but they're actually where they are identified. But unless this application is actually for the building of an HMO, we wouldn't necessarily know that. And they are actually very low figures as part of the overall numbers.
Yeah, just a quick question, because I mean, this kind of leads on to the topic that we've just discussed about education, some of the bits that came up in terms of good and outstanding schools. So have you thought about the infrastructure that's going to be around all of these houses? Because obviously if there's housing, there's going to be an extra demand for schools, for GPs, for all of these other services. So what is going to be put in place for those? And I noted in the previous item that it says that, which I was quite surprised to see, because we had a previous meeting that said that Luton has got enough secondary school places. We don't need any more secondary schools as opposed to an SEN school. But yeah, it says in the report that actually there's not enough secondary schools to go around. With this additional demand, what is that going to be looking like? Have you thought about a plan B essentially?
Thank you, Councillor. So I think we are in close contact with education to understand the figures do change. They fluctuate in terms of which years are larger than others, and they have a calculator which they share with us, and we have regular meetings with education. So we do require Section 106 money. We don't always get the amount that so Section 106, if you're aware of what that is contribution towards facilities and things like education, etc., transport. We do require that for school places. So if a development does generate additional requirement, they will be required to pay it. Or at least we will negotiate as much as we possibly can with them. But we do keep a close eye on it, and it is something that goes up and down depending on which year you're actually looking at. But I had a meeting with Paul Wagstaff, who was the director, who was just on the call now recently about this, and we've got meetings going forwards planned to make sure we're on top of this in planning as well.
Councillor Mahmood.
In light of, I mean, this is ideal time really, because if you're reviewing the local plan, then really this is something that you can, put in terms of the number of one bedroom, because we did have a policy before that there was an overspill, and they then were asked, and 2 and 3 bedroom were added on. So now at this present time, there are more 2 and 3 bedroom coming on than there were even 5 or 6 years ago. But with that, I don't think I've heard a developer who is or ever, wants to make any 106 contribution, because they're always pleading poverty. But I've never seen a poor builder yet or developer. But that is something for the council really, reviewing the policy. And because the town centre has got a huge amount of developments going on, and that's an issue that has been discussed many a time with the school places, particularly in the primary sector, that I think that you need to be really having a debate with the education colleagues, because that would be a more difficult one rather than high school places. Children are able to travel, but primary is more difficult when you get a 5 years old going on a bus for 30 or 40 minutes. So I think that needs to be taken into account, because there are major developments coming on in the town centre.
Just before you answer that, can I do a bit of chair's privilege on this for a moment? We are very much behind on the revision of our local plan. As I understood it, we are actually in a position where we're in breach of our obligations on the review of the local plan, where it's overdue. And in fact, it's had grave consequences for some parts of Luton, like the one that I represent, because the duty of cooperation that is cited in the report has led, for example, North Herts District Council to include housing to the east of Luton with no infrastructure, which wasn't actually needed, in their local plan. It was included only because of an unmet housing needs statement from Luton Borough Council. And not only did we not update our local plan, we didn't object in the planning process for North Herts District Council either. So from my point of view, it's very good news that we're now going to address the local plan. I just wish it had been sooner.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just come back on that? Because I think we've heard a lot tonight from Colin about people in temporary accommodation requiring larger properties. The needs are not being met within Luton. We've just kind of demonstrated that with the housing. There might be the number of units, but is not meeting the actual need for the type of accommodation that we need to deliver, which is 2 or 3 4-bedroom homes. With the allocation on the east of Luton, we will be securing affordable homes for people in Luton who are on our waiting list. We've got that agreement with North Hertfordshire Council. So actually, what I'm saying is, although we may have been behind on our local plan, the time that we've been able to spend on those negotiations with North Herts Council, I accept, there were objections from residents in the wards that you represent, but I think overall this will be a real benefit to Luton residents, because we will be requiring housing for Luton, which will be delivering against our unmet need. The planning application hasn't yet been submitted to North Herts Council, and we are working with North Herts to ensure that the right infrastructure is provided as part of that development as it comes forward. So they've been very accommodating in that respect and are willing to work with us to ensure that the development doesn't impact on Luton in the wrong way. So it will be providing facilities. We just don't know the extent of those facilities at the moment. Thank you.
Sorry, I pulled chair's privilege there. Further questions or comments, please?
Well, I've got several other points I want to raise on other issues in the report. Is this an appropriate time for me to start doing that?
Yes, I think it is. We'll move on, and then we'll see what that generates in terms of other questions from other members.
Can I ask one more question related to housing, just quickly?
Yes, but we need to keep it quick, because this report is not just housing.
It's on page 34. It talks about requirement of 9,300 dwellings provided out of the borough. I know that we've there's discussions going on with the Herts. Was it North Herts? I think. But is it dangerous to make that assumption they're going to be provided? Because we've already had authorities such as St Albans asking us if we can provide housing because they've run out of space. So where is this land going to come from? This 9,300 for 9,300 dwellings outside, because the presumption is that we need to provide 17,800 with a percentage of those obviously within the borough, which I think is 8,500, but the balance coming from out of the borough. And I think that's rather a dangerous presumption. It's going to be found.
Thank you, Councillor. So the total for North Herts to provide for Luton is around 1,900, if my figures are correct, 1,950. The rest is to be provided by Central Bedfordshire on sites that are actually on the edge of the north of Luton, and some other sites within Central Bedfordshire that are contained within their local plan. So that need has been identified in both of their local plans. I would say there is no mechanism by which we can force them to provide affordable housing for Luton. with North Herts, we have agreement and it's actually written into the policy, and they were happy to put it into the policy and the inspector agreed. With regard to Central Bedfordshire, we were unsuccessful in making that argument, and the inspector disagreed with the argument and didn't put it into the policy. So we don't have the same confidence that Central Bedfordshire will deliver affordable housing for Luton as we do for North Hertfordshire. Does that answer your question?
To Councillor Franks, we expand the discussion, sir.
Yep, thank you. Just a very brief comment on the points raised by Steve Stevens, if you don't mind. The fact is, of course, Luton is already providing houses for St Albans residents. If you want to take the trouble to drive around Bushmead or Wigmore on a Sunday morning, you will find an amazing number of Decorum and St Albans taxis parked on the drives, because the houses have been bought by taxi drivers who live in St Albans or lived in St Albans but can't afford to buy a house in St Albans, so they're buying houses in Luton where they're cheaper. So I think we're already making an adequate contribution to St Albans housing. Can I move on? On page 106, we have some figures on what's called infrastructure funding statements. It's been quite a while since we had these figures reported to us. It's a significant time ago. But one thing that hasn't changed is that the amount agreed is about 3 or 4 times the amount actually received. And the amount actually received is several times the amount actually spent. Now, I understand that the amount received would, I'll start the other end. The amount that's agreed isn't paid until the development commences or until the development reaches certain key stages which trigger the payments. So the amount received in the year may well be smaller than the amount agreed, but that can't go on forever, because the amount received would include contributions that were agreed several years ago. So you can't go on forever constantly receiving less than you agree year after year after year. And the same goes for the spending. There has to come a time when either the amount you receive is greater than the amount you've agreed, or the amount you're spending is greater than the amount you've received. So long as you keep on this track, we're actually not getting any benefit from the contributions that are being received. You can't keep going down and down and down every year. The figures have to balance out eventually, surely.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't have the full infrastructure schedule. This is just a summary. All I can say is we are monitoring this more carefully, and we have actually introduced a post to specifically start to keep on top of this more, so that we ensure that we are spending the money. I would say, though, that the money sits with different officers in different departments. So for education, it would sit with the education officer. For parks, it would sit with parks officer. And what we need to do is make sure that they are aware of when the money needs to be spent by. I think one of the because we only get small amounts of money as development comes forward, generally speaking, we are allowed to pool our contributions so that we get a cumulative amount. And you can do obviously more with a bigger sum of money. And I think that's what some officers are potentially doing, which is why some of the money isn't spent. But I can't answer the question in detail, but we could come back with a fuller response on that, if that would be helpful.
I think that would be very helpful, Chair. You can't go on year after year after year after year with these figures getting smaller and smaller. Can I move on to page 120? 122. I get very, very bored listening to Tory ministers telling me that the planning system is holding up the delivery of housing. It really, really irritates me. And of course, their comments are driven by the vast sums that the development companies contribute to Tory party funds, I've no doubt at all. But looking at these figures, we have 1,802 homes approved for development in the town where no development has actually started at all. These planning consents are usually granted with a start date, 3 years, I think it is these days. The development must start within 3 years of the consent being agreed. I'm aware that if you treat a planning consent as having expired at the end of that 3 years, the developer can come back with a renewal application, which is very difficult to resist. So they're almost certainly going to get it. The point is, it's an added inconvenience put in the way of developers. I don't lie awake at night worrying about developers. And I'm wondering whether, in fact, expired consents are really treated as expired, and are developers forced to come back with a further application to renew if they actually want to go ahead and do the development. I mean, there's an additional complication, of course, that a lot of these consents were granted to not to developers, but to landowners who simply wanted to establish the value of their land so that they can sell it on to somebody else. And they never had any intention of developing anything when they put the planning application in. And that goes on all the time. So I guess the question is, do we treat lapsed planning consents truly as lapsed and force anyone who wants to proceed with the development to come back with another application?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we do. If a planning permission has lapsed and the applicant has not come back to us within the required time, then we would require a new planning application to be submitted. What often happens, developers are aware of the deadlines and the time limits, which is generally 3 years, and they will come back to us within that period. The other element to this is that the planning system also allows, if someone has commenced development on site, albeit in a very minor way, they may have just put an access in to a site but not actually developed it. That does count as commenced, in which case their planning permission is valid and they have commenced that development. So we are unable to do anything about that. But certainly if a developer has not commenced on site and we see no proof of that, then we would require a new planning application to be submitted.
Yeah, I'm aware that simply digging a hole and filling it with concrete can be considered to have commenced development, and it's very difficult to deal with that. But there you go. It's not the planning system that's holding up the delivery of houses. It's greed by developers. Can I then move on to HMOs, which was mentioned a bit earlier on page 138? We're given the HMO gains and HMO losses. I simply want to understand the figures that are given here. Are they bedrooms or buildings? Sorry, page 138. You know.
They're buildings rather than bedrooms.
Thank you, that's helpful.
further questions? Yes, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. Just be more of a comment, though. I'll say the report is the way as it is. It's a bit. It's about 1.5, 2 years behind now. It's still 2022. I've noted the employment side of things as well, which I don't know why it's not been really mentioned. What is the affectability? Because you butterfly was the only one particularly mentioned. I don't know if it included other employment development across town, or was that ignored, or there was nothing happening at the other sites?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch all of what you were saying.
I've noted in the report, which included the employment side of things as well as the housing side of things. And in the employment side, only butterfly was specifically mentioned. Was there any other site mentioned? Probably I've gone through it. I've seen the question is there any other employment site in town, or there's no development happening in other sites? Is that why it's not been included in the report?
Butterfield is one of the main strategic sites for employment in the town, which is why we encourage development there. There are, I'm just trying to find, there is a map which actually shows where other employment sites have been gained. So in my summary was literally just pulling out the key ones, so Butterfield and around the Dallow area, but there are other employment sites within the town. There's actually an appendix that lists all the specific allocated employment sites, category A and category B in the town. And there is actually a summary that shows what's been happening in all of them, whether there's movement of business or change of business in them.
So ask, I've used the next report. You mentioned that it's going to be ready for spring next year.
Yes, I'm in the very early stages of doing the next one to cover the last 23.
23.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have another question myself, but Councillor Abbas, you wanted to get in first.
Thank you, Chair. Sue and Sarah, thank you for that. I think I welcome the fact you're reviewing this, and I think it was something that's overdue and needs to be done. So, in the infrastructure funding, the Section 106, I think as a council, we need to get a bit more robust with developers. They will always plead poverty, but they do make a lot of money, and one bedrooms make a lot of money, especially in flats and things. So I think we just need to get a bit more robust, and our viability assessments, I think we need to look at how we assess viability, not rely on them to give it to us, but have something of our own about how we do that. So I'd welcome something in here about that. The other thing I take on board, you said we're running out of space, and I'm conscious if you look around the town, we're building on any bit of brownfield or anything. Have we thought about what we're doing with existing stock, particularly where we're looking at 3-4 bedroom houses? And I don't know if this fits in here or somewhere else, but are we encouraging even ourselves and others to actually do loft conversions, turn three bedrooms into 4 bedrooms and turning 2 bedrooms into 3 bedrooms? It's existing stock and using that, because we will run out of land. And I'm just quite worried that people are asking for 3 and 4 bedrooms, but how are we encouraging that?
Thank you, Councillor. I can't answer in detail around that, but colleagues in housing are always looking at ways in which they can maximise the current stock and the capacity of the current stock. And of course, they do have the ability to develop as well. And there are sites coming forward that are being developed by housing colleagues. So, you know, we obviously consider them from a planning perspective. We don't have a specific policy for council-owned property within the local plan. It would just be dealt with in terms of the overall policy for housing. So yes, we would encourage as you know, and colleagues in housing will always want to be providing the 3-bedroom properties. I think one of the areas perhaps going forward, given the fact that we are running out of land, is that it's always been seen that we should be providing houses with gardens. Now, we don't probably have the luxury of continually providing houses with gardens, and there are other ways of providing larger accommodation to meet the needs of our growing population, which perhaps is an area that we need to discuss more with housing colleagues, and we do discuss that with them. But I think, you know, that is going forward where we need to think we can maybe make a change in terms of the way we look at schemes coming forward.
For that, and just one last comment. I'm thinking about my future. What about accommodation and things for older people? Because a lot of people, I mean, older people want bungalows, single story, accessible accommodation. Is there any thought given to that within the local plan?
Thank you. Yes, we will be looking at wheelchair accessible policy going forward in the local plan, ensuring that we have got some standards in there. This is in the new local plan. Older persons' properties, there is a policy in there, but we are reliant on our colleagues in housing so whenever we get a planning application, we'll consult colleagues in housing with regard to affordable housing, but also any other needs that the town has, that council has, in terms of different types of accommodation, and we'll try and negotiate that with the developer as far as possible.
Yes, since I'll come back to you in a moment, if I may. Yeah, just furthering on from the question, there was reference to Butterfield Green, which of course is in my ward again. We have, I believe, been badly served with Butterfield Green as a ward, primarily because planning consents have been given, usually in recent times at any rate, for Butterfield Green on a generic basis, with then detailed changes to the designs and what is being provided being delegated authority thereafter. I feel that has let us down, and in some cases has introduced unwanted developments within Butterfield Green. And I feel that we need to be more robust in terms of challenging these sorts of generic planning applications, and it go back to Development Management Committee rather than just being decided at an officer level.
Thank you, Councillor Chair. I mean, I think we will always try and use the policy to guide our officer reports and our decisions around this. I do understand there has been a slight change in terms of the types of development that are now being built up there, but it does comply with the policy that we have in the local plan. So we are ensuring that we meet the policy requirements from that perspective. But yes, I understand, and you've expressed those concerns before around the type of development at Butterfield. I think the issue is there's just no demand for other types of developments. So we're having to deal with the planning applications that are coming forward. Obviously, we recommended approval for those. They do provide jobs for Luton, albeit perhaps not the type of development ideally we would have liked. And because the local plan is some years old now, the market for employment land has changed significantly, particularly since COVID.
Begum, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, just going back to what my colleague asked in relation to the employment side of stuff. So if I can just take you to page 108 and 109. So in the graph in 109, you've got quite a few figures there. And you've got your table that starts off saying the year, B1A, B1B, and so on. So just looking at the previous page, I understand that the B1 class category is about the businesses, but what does the A and B and C afterwards means? I know it's a bit of a silly question, but for me to make sense of what these figures actually mean.
Sorry, just bear with us. What, can you just repeat the page number?
109. So it starts from 107, but 109 is where you've got the actual table.
Right, thank you. We found the table. So there's different categories of employment land, as you quite rightly say. The B1 employment land is generally offices, B2 is industrial, and B8 is logistics or warehousing. That is, sorry, am I answering the question that you asked? So there is a further breakdown, a detailed breakdown in the use classes order, which I could provide to you if you would like me to. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, I think it will be helpful for us to be able to make sense of what all of this means.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just in response, Chair, to the comments that you made about outline consents for employment areas, it doesn't only apply to Butterfield, of course. There's quite a bit coming forward in around the area of Junction 10. Yeah, of course, I understand, as you're entitled to be. I just wanted to make the point that as from now, where outline consents are approved without any clues at all about the kind of employment that's likely to be created, the kind of occupier, the amount of traffic that may be coming to and from, and all the other questions that flow from the reserved matters, which are decided by officers. Liberal Democrats on Development Management Committee will be asking in those situations that the reserved matters come back to the committee for the committee to decide. And we've been told by the management that if that's what the committee wants, then that's what the committee can have.
Yeah, one last point from me, Chair. Is there on page 121, and I'm here referring to Power Court, is there any progress on that? Because that will give us 1,200 dwellings once the new grounds and other developments are taking place, and presumably once that has been completed and the football Luton Town is able to move there, that will then open up Kimpton Road, presumably as another big chunk of land that can be used for potential housing, but it will be dependent on when the development of Power Court actually starts to take place. So I'd be keen to know if there's any news on that.
Thank you, Councillor. No, I don't have any news. We try and keep close contact with the club and support them as far as we can. So as soon as we get a planning application, obviously we'll try and deal with that as quickly as we possibly can, but I can't give you anything. You might want to ask the club themselves and they might be able to update you.
Noted.
Any more questions? I would like to say for myself that this statutory report, we haven't seen one of these, at least not that I can remember. I don't think since I've been a councillor, maybe not, maybe it has, but I don't think so. I'm very pleased to have seen it. We're being asked to note the contents of the report. I think you all have understood from all the levels of questions that we go further than noting the report. We very much welcome it, and I'm almost inclined to think that we ought to be much stronger than just noting the report. I'd certainly like to thank you very much for having produced the report. It's very welcome. So welcome and thank you very much. Do we want to do anything other than just to say that we note the report, or has the discussion been enough? What's the board's view?
This is difficult, Chair, because we could express concern about a good many of the things that are going on, but to whom do you want to address that concern? Most of the issues that we would want to raise are not executive matters, so simply referring them to the executive won't produce any positive results. Some of them are development management issues, and again, I think the members of Development Management Committee are well aware because they share the concerns that we have. So yeah, I'm quite happy to try and put together something that expresses concern about some of the things that are happening and some of the things that are not happening. But I'm not at all sure where that concern should be addressed.
It would, yes, sir.
I'll say, as you mentioned, Chair, we should note this report, which that's what the officers have expressly put in black and white. I'll say we've of course say thank you to them for producing this report, which has not been around for a while, and of course we note it, and whichever concerns which I think should have been raised or have been raised by colleagues here, and that should put that to bed. Thank you.
I mean, sir, could we not maybe, Councillor Franks might consider that maybe we not just expressing concern, but asked if some further investigation could take place into the areas of concern that we have, to see if there are any solutions might. I can't rapidly get some words together for that, but
can we then for tonight's.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say I think we should note this report, given that this is going to be revised in a year's time. I'm not sure what more we can do in the meantime. And Councillor Franks' issues, I think I feel are more for the Development Management Committee. If they're already concerned, are they not feeding this back to obviously the town planners?
You'd like me to respond to that? I can say to you, yes, indeed, they are feeding these back to the planning department and the development management. Sadly, the regulations don't actually leave the council with very much room to do something about it. You're faced with a developer who says, yes, I want to build 50 3-bedroom flats and 40 2-bedroom flats and 75 1-bedroom flats, and if you don't accept the 1-bedroom flats, then you don't get the 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom ones. And what the hell are you supposed to do? You could refuse the application, which will no doubt go to appeal, where the developer stands a reasonable chance of getting their consent on appeal, and bearing in mind that a consent granted on appeal will quite often be granted without some of the conditions that we would put on as a local planning authority. So you're losing out, in several different ways. It really isn't as easy as it seems, and the fault really lies in the government regulation, which doesn't allow planning authorities to actually take sensible decisions for the area that they represent. yes, the concerns are passed on, but you're not passing them on to the people who are passing the laws and making the rules.
I'm going to cut a halt at this point, I think, because unless you desperately need to.
No, I was just going to say some of the concerns David just answered, given us some of his answers. Yeah. And I would just suggest that we note the report and ask the officers to please feedback our issues we raised back to the town planning.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to propose at this point that we move forward, because I think we accept the fact that we note the report. I think that in due course, after the minutes are produced for this meeting, it may be necessary for us to try and see if we can instigate some discussions between a subset of this committee with the officers to discuss some of the issues raised. I think I'd like to leave it that way unless anybody's got an objection.
Yes. I have actually had a slight brainstorm, a little light bulb lit up a couple of seconds ago. I think we could ask the officers to make sure that the concerns expressed here are considered by all of the people, including the elected members who are working on the revision of the local plan.
Thank you.
My microphone. So on page 164, item 9, review of cumulative impact policy. This is associated with licensing. So over to the officers to introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. So, yeah, the first one of two is as you rightly said, the review of the cumulative impact policy, which we currently have 2 areas within our current policy, that being Hightown and the town centre. They were adopted originally in January 2021, and they've got a statutory footing for 3 years, which takes us to January 24. So a cumulative impact policy is where we have ongoing concerns from a licensable activity perspective for licensed premises, which is an ongoing concern, hence why we've moved into Hightown and the town centre, but this can be open to any other wards of the town. And yeah, we're looking to progress this through to see whether we can sustain the current cumulative impact policy. The difference between the consultation process for the cumulative impact policy to the main body policy, which I'll come on to for the second item, is that we have to collate all the evidence up front, so to speak. So we consult on the evidence that we've already laid out, as opposed to going out to consult to get people's comments back to review that in our current policy. So yeah, keep it short, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Right. Any questions? I'm going to provoke things here a little bit, since Councillor Mahmood is very much involved with licensing area. Have you got any comments to give us right away?
No, Chair, I've got no comment really, in the sense that we adopt the policy, and that really this would be a probably standard what we have already agreed. And I think in terms of the town centre and Hightown, extending that to some parts of the Hightown, so that in licensing there's no confusion in terms of that. So I'd suggest that we agree to it, and I've got no further comment to add.
Very much focused on licensing, this report. but there are cumulative impact issues outside of licensing. In particular, the local plan working party has for some time been concerned about the proliferation of hot food takeaways near schools, for example. The reference here is to late night refreshment, which of course requires a completely separate license. But the fact that you're selling hot chicken after 11 o'clock at night is not really relevant when you're looking at the problem of the proliferation of hot food takeaways around schools. Very few schools are open at 11 o'clock at night. So I think what I'm saying is, although I accept everything that's here, it is very licensing focused. It's not addressing the cumulative impact of other issues that are not quite so associated with licensing. And it doesn't, for example, there's reference here to the difficulty of continuing the Hightown policy, when I would hope that the sheer numbers of hot food takeaways in Hightown on their own ought to be sufficient reason to be able to continue. But again, you know, the report is very licensing focused, and I think it's in that sense we're missing a trick. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. You mentioned obviously about the numbers of a particular premises in an area. Unfortunately, the legislation for the cumulative impact policy doesn't allow us to take into account the demand and the need, so the amount of premises in an area. So it's about the ongoing issues of antisocial behaviour, littering, all alcohol concerns in a particular area from the licensed premises.
It's a licensing response, Chair. I guess what I'm asking for is a planning response. Yeah, perhaps we're a bit too late for that this evening, but licensing isn't the only issue here.
Under the licensing laws, that you can only consider this sort of thing on licensing under only licensing committee. As far as the planning one is concerned, you'd be pleased to know that after 6 years, the executive has agreed that they will implement the recommendation which was made some time ago, particularly around the takeaways and the other establishment near the schools. And I'm hoping that this will be implemented pretty soon, because they have now agreed, I think, in the last few weeks on that issue, which was agreed some time ago by this council. When the policy came to it. So that has been now agreed, and it will go ahead.
Thank you, Councillor Best.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to pick up on what Councillor Franks was saying. I think the issue you're referring to, I think is picked up in a healthy food strategy. I think the council has developed that off the top of my head, and I think that was looking at numbers of takeaways around schools. And looking at that, because obviously dealing with child obesity, that's one of the concerns, and promoting healthy foods. I think it's picked up in that, and that's what I think Councillor Hussain is referring to.
Yes, Councillor Frank.
Yeah, just for information, that currently the Health and Social Care Scrutiny is looking to find the means by which planning and licensing and public health can be pulled together to deal with the issue. I think their focus there is on obesity, but it's an issue beyond just obesity.
Do you want to come back on that as the officer presenting this report? It would appear that though there seems to be a consensus that this is right, that perhaps it's too narrow in its scope. Have you got a comment to make about that?
Well, I think as Councillor Franks has already made reference, the planning and licensing regimes at the moment are completely two separate regimes, and they've got these separate frameworks in terms of how they assess and come to a decision. There is a paper and some works happening behind the scenes that has been going on for many years now to try and combine the two, the planning and licensing, somewhat together some way to try and overcome some of the issues that we've been talking about tonight. But at the minute, it's still a separate regime with separate decisions and different frameworks to make the decisions.
So how do we get to the end of that dilemma then?
That's what Health and Social Care Scrutiny is looking at, Chair.
Okay, so how quickly do you have to act on this report? We're being asked to consider the adoption of the cumulative impact assessment. By adopting it, does that lock us in to just being licensing focused rather than licensing and wider issues of planning? So if we say yes to that recommendation, are we stuck?
Well, the reason why we've got a slight delay on this at the moment, because our current cumulative impact policy does expire, the 3-year process expires January 24, is that our colleagues in other areas are going out for consultation on a PSPO in the town centre in recent weeks. So rather than duplicate the process to ask very similar questions, we're tying the consultation together so we don't have to go out to the same stakeholders and ask them very similar questions, and obviously take a lot more time and a lot more expense to do the consultation twice. So in answer to your question, as it stands at the moment, the legislation is quite specific for a cumulative impact policy, which it will be around. It's about licensed premises under the Licensing Act. Until there is a statutory national change, we won't be able to incorporate anything additional to what currently is in the legislation.
So can I just ask a question then, of the board rather than the viewers officer? Given that we have a clear risk here from what I can see, that our current policy will expire if we don't say yes to this, do we just say yes, but then come back again to officers to ask for a wider remit as a future process? Yes, Councillor Baggins.
Sorry, I just want to say that I think when it comes to this report, because the officer is saying that the remit of this report is only with policy and the licensing policy. And I think the other elements that Councillor Franks is asking about will be sort of discussed within the other frameworks that fall under different boards. So I think as it stands, my own take on this is that we accept it as it is and let the other boards decide on the other elements.
Yes, Councillor Franks.
Yeah, I'm quite happy to accept the recommendation as it's stated, but perhaps we could add that we strongly recommend the officers involved in this report get involved in the work of Health and Social Care Scrutiny in trying to pull together licensing, planning and public health to deal with the wider issues.
Do you be happy with that? I see a nod.
Yeah, we're already doing some work, and we have been doing for some time. So we'd have a responsible authority group. So there's a statutory list of departments that form the responsible authorities for under legislation, planning, environment, health, training standards, police, etc. And we have a meeting once a month to discuss various topics and applications. So we've been doing that for some time. And I believe my service manager, Tony Ireland's actually on a group and doing some work with public health in relation to premises and the healthy eating aspect and life premises. So we're doing some work behind the scenes, but it's sort of not a magic one, so to speak, to happen overnight. But there are stuff going around in the background. So we're not just doing this in isolation. We are working collaboratively with other services.
Thank you. I think we have then a consensus, which is we're taking this one as it stands, given the reassurance that we're going to get a wider remit following the other work. Okay. Next then, Eunice. Item 10, the update on the licensing policy. I gather it's a follow-on, sir.
Yeah, it is. Thank you, Chair. So we adopted our main body licensing policy in 2021 also. And this, we have a statutory duty to review and refresh that every 5 years. However, there's been some significant changes, we believe, since we adopted this policy in 2021. We thought we didn't want to leave this till 2026 to make these changes, because we'll probably be on to do changes something else by then. And the things that we're looking to change and amend are, we think, quite pertinent to what's happening around now, and especially around the alcohol delivery sales, which seems to have taken off since COVID, I believe. So obviously where the premises and things were shut, it's sort of just transformed and it's become sort of a main business now, doing the alcohol sales, delivery sales, shall I say. So our previous policy, it touched on alcohol delivery sales, and I know I'm just talking about that in isolation, but there's a couple of other things that we're looking to amend. But we really wanted to put some context around what our expectations were of operators in relation to alcohol delivery sales. And again, it's not a magic wand to say it's going to change everything that's wrong about the alcohol delivery sales, but it's a starting point to use as a basis to move forward from that, hopefully. So yeah, we've got a number of things. I trust that you've all had time to read the report that we're looking to revise and add into the policy. Yeah, I'm happy to take questions.
Just make one comment, and then I'm going to pass it back over to members. I actually was a member of a board where it was an alcohol delivery issue, and a pretty contentious one at the time. So yes, I think it's timely. It would appear that you have a united group that says, yes, please get on with it. And thank you very much, but yes, please.
Thank you, Chair.
We're on to the final item, which is item 11. You'll find on page 245, which is our forward work programme. You already need to note my initial updates as well for some of those items. But Eunice, you can lead us through this. You know it better than me.
Chair, as you've rightly said, you have covered most of the items for discussions on this work program. I think the only thing I would add is a request that a report regarding crime be submitted to this board by the police. And there's ongoing conversations at the moment about that to come to scrutiny.
Personally, I would welcome somebody coming to talk that through with us, because there are certainly from my side concerns that some of the data that we receive about crime levels and crime sensibilities around the ward, the town are not in line with what my residents and I feel. We wish to try and support Eunice in trying to get the police to give us crime update to this board, please.
Yes, yes, I would support that. And it'd also be good to get figures around policing as well, community policing, a number of police officers. I know our PCC is very liberal with some of the facts. Is very liberal with the facts, and he often puts quite a lot of spin on it. We're supposed to have the most officers ever in the Bedfordshire Police Force, and he recently, a few months ago, decided to put 10 new community police officers in the Bedfordshire villages instead of Luton. So I would really like to know where he is, where the actual figures are.
The board might be interested to know that at a recent Let's Talk meeting for the East Wards, the local community policing team was disclosed as being down to 1 inspector and 1 constable for the whole of Luton.
Yeah, sorry, I missed the opening of this item. I assume you're talking about the policing item scheduled for the 20th of November. In which case, I've got 2 things to say. One, I've got no complaint about the local policing in Barnfield and Bushmead area. Thank you very much. It all works very well indeed. We have a inspector, a constable, and 2 police and community support officers, PCSOs. But I'm well aware that the situation isn't the same across the whole town, and there are huge gaps. What I would ask is that at the earliest opportunity, we be given confirmation that this item is coming to the 20th of November meeting, or confirmation of the date when it will be coming, because I know several people who would like to be there when this is discussed, and I want to be able to tell them the date that it definitely will be on an agenda. So the sooner we can get an absolute confirmation that the police are going to come and give us the presentation, then the sooner the better.
Chair, yes, Councillor Francis, right. Just to add that that 20th of November date is just for monitoring purposes. There's ongoing conversations with Adam Divney and Marek Lubelski, because they are, the officers in lead on this particular item. So, well, as soon as I have received the feedback from those 2 people, I will let members know.
I perhaps would like to add the fact that where we're talking about police, I personally don't want to just see council officers. I want to see somebody who represents the police also giving their inputs into this. It's not just an officer matter. Councillor Mahmood, before Eunice replies.
Just to say that PCC had given an undertaking, which is minuted in the full council's minutes, about 18 months ago, that he will definitely come back. Now he's free. He can come to the full council and answer the questions. So
perhaps now he's stopped campaigning to be an MP. Yes. He'll find the time to come and see us.
So I'd suggest that the full council demand that he comes to.
Councillor Stevens, and then I'm going back to Eunice.
Yeah, just on the next the Monday the 23rd of on the Monday the 23rd, which is today's one, I noticed that the climate change climate change advisory group report was crossed out. I don't notice anywhere on there where it's coming back again.
Yeah, there's been some information about that. I think that climate change report has now been adopted by the council, and officers have confirmed that a progress will be reported at some point, I think in September, October 2024. So if you go to page 251, navigating towards the bottom of that page, the second bullet point there.
Sorry, on which one?
Go to page
251.
Oh,
second
okay.
bullet point.
Yeah, towards the bottom of the page.
Okay.
Gives that information.
Oh, yeah, I see it there.
Thank you.
Okay, and can I just say for the chair, for the next meeting where we've got review of London Luton Airport annual monitoring report, are those just officers of the council, that are coming? Because I did make the request previously that we have somebody from the operating company coming.
It is traditional when this item comes up for the operating company to send 2 or 3 senior managers to answer questions.
So is that, so is one of those, which ones of those are the senior ones then? So on page 24.
Don't understand the question.
The question, I think, is, Eunice, do we have any confirmation about who from the airport operating company will attend?
Chair, the answer to that question is I haven't got any confirmation. However, traditionally, we always have people, officers from the corporation company to attend and, report on this item. The main contact person is Sue Frost, who is the lead as a council officer. But I believe, I don't have any confirmation, but I believe that she'll be coming in with people from the airport.
If I may help, Chair, usually the report is presented by David Gertler, who is a planning consultant engaged by the council. And his interest is obviously to represent the best interests of the council and the council's airport company. The operating company have always sent at least 2 very senior managers to deal with questions, and I'm sure if Eunice was to contact them, they would confirm exactly who they're going to send.
I do think it's important that we have confirmation. I mean, I noticed at your Let's Talk, Chair, that there was major issues that came up from the people in your wards about things like airport noise. That certainly happened in the Let's Talk that took place in the south. Major issues and in our discussions with residents in Central Ward, we also found a lot of issues that have come up about the airport noise and expansion. So it is important that we have officers attending from the airport.
It would appear, Eunice, that if we can, we need to try and confirm up the attendance, please, and then perhaps we can then circulate that to members of the board so that they know who's going to attend.
Chair, happy to speak to Sue Frost about this.
Okay, thank you. I've certainly been pleased to see some new reports, so that's been excellent. Thank you very